And for our final story for this edition of the Rolling Stone, we move from the left and realign our focus on the right. And this is going to be a very, very short video because, as I said in my very first video in the introduction, I am only giving some off the cuff remarks about this topic. I will probably return to it again in the near future. Yes, that is a promise. In a proper On the Stone video where I will dive more in depth into this. But I think that it has to be, at least a volley has to be fired now, just in order to prepare everyone for what is about to come. Because I hate to say it, gang, but if there is one thing that we have learned since the beginning of the year, it's that the American right is practically worthless and useless. In fact, it is almost worse than useless. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some good people still in it and not some very brave, very smart people in it. I would say that Matthew Peterson, who is one of the editors of American Mind magazine, ranks there. Robert Oscar Lopez, Denise McAllister, very good people who are part of the American right. However, you might have noticed something about those names. None of them are mainstream. I haven't mentioned Ben Shapiro. I haven't mentioned Andrew Klavan. I haven't mentioned Dave Rubin. I haven't mentioned Glenn Beck, Lauren Chan, Allie Beth Stuckey, Steven Crowder, or any of the other usual suspects as it comes to it, because these people that I just listed and all the other ones whom I haven't listed are, unfortunately, in my personal opinion, they have become prey to the system itself. All right? And let me just give a very, very brief example here. So I follow Matt Walsh on Twitter. Matt Walsh used to write for The Blaze, and then, for whatever reason, he jumped ship and went to the Dailywire. All right. This was, of course, the Wunderkind himself, Ben Shapiro's website, which he created after he left Breitbart as an editor because he thought that Breitbart was too pro-Trump. Was he right? Maybe. But that doesn't matter for our story right here. So Matt Walsh writes essays, which are behind a paywall, FYI, and he also does his own podcast, The Matt Walsh Show, on the Dailywire. I was about to say something snarky, but I'm going to swallow it because I've been saying far too many snarky things. I am in a strange mood this week, gang. So if you've made it this far, give yourself a gold star. But on January 21st, Matt Walsh sent out a couple of tweets. And the first one he said, and they were about retaking the culture, because of course people on the right are now starting to ask, well, what do we do now? What do we do now? What do we do now? Because let me be honest, even if you were not a QAnon conspiracy theorist, which in my humble opinion was a waste of time to be a QAnon conspiracy theorist, and we definitely know now that it was a huge waste of time, I think a lot of people on the right still thought that Trump was going to win re-election. He was going to win, to paraphrase Mark Stein, he was going to win above the margin of lawyers. So even if the left cheated, which I think a lot of people thought that they would, they thought that Trump was still going to pull off a home run. We now know, of course, that the odds are always with the House, and the left owns the House. The left owns the crap game, which is now the United States of America, especially its institutions, and particularly in this instance, its electoral system. So, a lot of people on the right have been asking themselves, where do we go from here? What do we do? The entire world has practically crumbled down around us. A lot of people on the right, for years now, have massaged their worries into a coma, I'll say, because they pinned all their hopes on the silent majority, the silent majority, the silent majority. I remember scrolling on Instagram, and I found a post where it said, you don't hear it, you'll never see it coming. That's why we're called the silent majority. Well, I believe that this past election, the election of 2020, completely destroyed all hope that the right had for the silent majority. Or if the right is smart, it will have destroyed it, because we found out that even if you have a silent majority, you can't beat the system when it is this corrupted, and when the people who hate your guts control all the levers of power within that system. So, to repeat myself again, people on the right have been wondering, what are we going to do? What's the next step? How do we actually turn this boat around? Which I'm glad they're asking the questions. But then, when they ask those questions, we run the risk of actually coming up with asinine answers like Matt Walsh did. Matt Walsh, to this specific question, had a couple of tweets in which he put in some solutions, quote unquote. He said in one that the only way to actually win the culture, the best way to win the culture, was to get married, have kids, and then to homeschool them. And then in another tweet, he said this: get married, have kids, buy guns, buy books, buy land, turn off the TV. This is the way. Yeah, trying to sound like he's the flippin' Mandalorian, okay? It's not gonna work, Matt. Sorry. And that's all fine and dandy. For all of my snark, for all of my derision in these videos. And again, gang, I'm sorry. It is just, I apologize. I have just been in a mood. It's like all of these ideas, all of these words have been bubbling in my head for the last couple of days. And this is now just the volcano that is coming out. And I'm sorry if you guys are in the line of fire. I'm sorry. I apologize. But let me be objective here. Let me try to be objective, okay? Because Matt Walsh is not entirely wrong, okay? Part of winning back the culture is going to depend on these solid primordial things like us getting married, actually having kids, raising them well. Yes, getting back to nature, getting back to the land, becoming yeoman farmers, in a sense, again, which might be another area I'm going to have to explore in a future video, because I'm sure as hell not even going to open up that bag of worms here. The problem, however, is that this is not the whole solution. At best, this is just one of the cartridges that you load up in your 6-shooter for taking back the culture. This is just part of the answer, which everyone can easily see when we start asking questions. Okay, for example, get married. Well, okay, how are we going to do that when marriage rates have been plummeting now for years? How are we going to do that when there is actually a sex depression going on? Fewer and fewer people actually wanting to physically have sex, part because of our pornified culture, and part and parcel because of the hookup culture. Sex isn't special anymore. How are we going to convince people to have kids when even conservatives think that, in vitro fertilization and then taking out those fetuses and allowing them to grow into a pod is a good and conservative thing, because it might actually lower the abortion rate, because people will actually be able to see babies form in real time. FYI, people, if sonograms didn't convince the hard pro-abortion supporters, actually watching a baby develop in a petri dish isn't going to do the trick either. Here's another thing. Buy land. Okay, that's great. How? How, when so many people are losing their jobs? Again, to refer back to my second video, Joe Biden just axed 70,000 jobs in the U.S. economy. How are those people going to be buying land? Because when you're unemployed, you don't know where your next job is going to come from, and you know damn well that this next administration is going to make it harder and harder and harder for you to work, whether you're in the oil industry, whether, for example, you are a teacher in a Christian or a private school, whether you're a teacher in a public school who just does not want to follow the woke mandates. And just in general, when pledging allegiance, when handing over your soul to be baptized into the left is now becoming more and more a requirement in order for you to either get or to hold on to a job. How are people going to actually put aside enough money to buy land? On top of that, that wages have been stagnating for years. And especially when the Biden administration isn't going to help the situation at all by promising to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, thereby guaranteeing that more jobs are going to be lost, and then also more of the fundamental things like food and electricity and water and things like that are going to become more and more and more expensive because, of course, prices have to rise in order for people to continue to make a profit and to keep offering their services and goods when they also have to take more out of their pockets in order to pay their employees because the government has mandated that they do. And the minimum wage is a very complex subject. At least it has become so in my mind. I'm going to have to do a whole video on that too. I'm giving you guys all previews of ideas that I'm getting for future regular On the Stone videos. But this is the problem. Matt Walsh doesn't answer any of these questions. And I understand Twitter is a cesspool. It was before the Great Purge. And it is now even more of a cesspool. Did you know, for example, that Twitter you knew that Twitter deplatformed Trump. They locked him out of his account forever. They were purging conservative voices simply because, oh my goodness, you've violated these bylaws of our company, or you've violated, our terms of services. We can't have this. At the same time, this same Twitter refused to take down child pornography that was being shared and posted on its site because, it didn't violate our company policies. FYI, if child pornography doesn't violate your policies, then you are the scum of the earth. All right? So, having said that, I understand that Twitter is not actually where you go to get into the nitty-gritty of solutions, especially solutions for such a profound question as how do we save the country? But at the same time, how are we actually going to do this? Because again, he didn't have a thread where he said, okay, maybe we can do this in order to achieve this goal. Maybe we can do this in order to achieve this goal. It was just those single tweets, and that was it. This is the way. That's the first problem, because no, there are no actual guidelines for how to do this. And second of all, this is not the whole way. Imagine if the founding fathers in 1775 had just decided that the best way to break the tyranny of England was just to have more kids and to stop subscribing to certain Tory newspapers. We never would have gotten anywhere, gang. I am convinced, okay? And I've never met Matt Walsh. Could be a very nice guy. I don't know. But it seems to me that more and more people on the right are putting out these so-called solutions because then it takes the onus off of them. They were fine and willing to be commentators, to be considered, intellectual leaders, influencers, thought leaders, etc., etc., etc. But now, when the entire world has changed, they don't want to upset the apple cart. And so they are taking the onus off of themselves. We don't have to come up with any solutions. You little people, simply do all this and everything will be all right. It puts the onus on everyone else and takes it off of them, which justifies them not having to do anything. And when I say them, I mean the conservative establishment, conservative Inc., and the conservative estabulary, which is a differentiation which I have made before, might have to make again in the future. This is the problem with the American right. And this actually might be a blessing in disguise, because it has shown us that the American right is just as useless, just as worthless, just as gutless as, I would say, as the left. But it's a hollow husk, gang. And again, to paraphrase Mark Stein, one of my contemporary heroes, you can't fight something with nothing. For however perverted the left is, and it is hellishly perverted, in its first principles, its philosophies, its lines of logic. At least it believes in something. I don't know anymore what the right believes in, especially when you get into the establishment and the estabulary classes. I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I believe that their end goals, their aims, are not the end goals and aims that we should be having, and they're definitely not the end goals and aims that we should be striving for in order to refound the country as she was originally supposed to be. But having said all that, I have been talking for way too long. Again, I've been a volcano this week, and I apologize again. Gang, stay safe, stay free. I am going to strive my utmost to get videos out again on a timely manner. All right? I apologize. Thank you again for your patience. I'm going to keep trying to get back on track there. Take care, gang. Ciao for now.